Well, I think the proper thing is to say, to begin with, how privileged I feel to be invited to address this audience, having been put out to pasture quite a long time by now, and sort of feeling that this one's being still alive. Let me just say a word or two about the film. The film, these are bits and pieces of film that I took in 1963 when I revisited the Talensi, so that it dates to a later period than my first field work in 34 to 37. But the astonishing thing was, or the delightful thing to me was, to find that I could take up my inquiries and my interest exactly where I'd left them in 1937, 1940, 45, 37. And that, owing to the advancement, the development of technology, tape recording and cinecamera work, it was possible for me to get records of these divination sessions and divining in general, which were quite out of the question in the earlier days when there were no such machinery. Of course, you took still photographs, you've seen those, and then, as I shall show you when I come to read some extracts, one had to make notes as one went along, sitting with a diviner, or perhaps try to reconstruct from memory a divination sequence. And since I'm not alone in that experience, since Professor Goody has been in exactly the same situation in a very parallel culture, I'm sure he will confirm that the tape recorder has been a great boon and also a great impediment, because with the tape recorder you say that tape's recording everything, I don't need to listen. So half your battle then comes years later when you try to transcribe from the tape recorder what happened. So the point I'm making to begin with is that we're going to see pictures, film, taken in 1963, approximately 30 years after my first contact with the Talensi. And nevertheless, in those 30 years, a lot of things had happened. People, instead of walking to see me or coming on a horse or a donkey, everyone came on bicycles. People, as you'll see, all the women were wearing clothes in 63, 1937. This was not at all common, and so on. There were many literate people among them, so that, and there were even some Christians. So that although 30 years had happened, we have here something of extraordinary stability and fixity in this culture. Well, so much for the background. Now, I'm going to talk about divination, and I want first of all to remind you that divination, in one form or another, is a remarkably widespread phenomenon in human societies everywhere. Making choices is very difficult to all of us. Taking responsibility for our choices is often very difficult. And in most human societies, there are forms of divination, forms of external decision-taking or external authorization of decisions, which take innumerable different forms. It's an interesting fact that the old Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, Hastings Encyclopedia, if we've ever seen it, has a large section on divination, talking in general terms about divination and about specific divination from Babylonians, Assyrians, Hebrews, Greeks, Latins, and so on, all the Sinai, goodness knows what. But the most recent, the current Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences, has no article under the title divination. So you can see how points of view have changed in this time. In the 1908 to 11, divination was still regarded as a very important problem to investigate in the concept, in the framework of comparative religion. By whatever it was, in the 1960s, that particular kind of issue is relegated to an insignificant place. Let me just, perhaps as much for your amusement as for your instruction, read to you how divination is defined in Hastings' Encyclopedia. The writer was a very well-known classical scholar called Rose, H.C. Rose, you know, who wrote quite a lot about ancient Greeks in Rome. By divination, he says, is meant the endeavor to obtain information about things future or otherwise removed from ordinary perception by consulting informants other than human. While mostly directed to foretelling coming events, it is not continued in this way, but may seek to find out, for example, what is going on at home while the inquirer is abroad. And then he talks about how widespread it is in ancient times and in modern times. And of course, some of you here will probably still remember the witch of Endor, who, what did she do? She, I think, raised Samuel from the dead or something like that, and anyhow warned King Saul, about his impending troubles. And in fact, the Old Testament and the New Testament is full of divinations of this sort. In the early part of this century, when divination was still regarded as important, it was regarded as one of those branches of pseudoscience that Fraser wrote about and Tyler wrote about and people like that. But of course, from our point of view, in terms of our generation, the great classic of divination is Evans Pritchard's book on witchcraft, oracles, and magic among the Azandi, which will be shown tonight at 9 o'clock on television, the Granada television. Because that's the whole story, the central theme there is these Azandi methods of divination. They even got into Jonathan Miller's series on the body, wasn't it? Where I think he compared Azandi diviners' activities with his own activities as a doctor, something like that. But you'll all remember the different forms of divination. By the rubbing board, by the Bengi oracle, and finally by the witch doctor. And in a way, this sums up quite a range of possibilities. But there are a great many other possibilities, and the two main possibilities that are of interest in West Africa, and I'm not going to elaborate on all the other possibilities, is this. There are forms of divination by means of what looks like a completely objective technique. Like tossing a penny, and you get an answer. Or the Bengi oracle was one. Heads, I do this, tails, I do that. That helps me make my choice. That's one aspect, one kind of divination you get in West Africa. In all various varieties of elaborations. Perhaps one of the most elaborate is in the form of the Yoruba Ifa cult, where your diviner opens the divination by throwing in front of himself two sets of shells or cowries or something like that mounted on a string, and that allows for the possibility, since each one can fall concave or convex, allows for the possibility of what I think they're 8 on a string, so you have possible combinations of 8, 16 by, well, all sorts of permutations and combinations. I think you can get something like 264 different possible combinations. And to each of these patterns that emerge from throwing these strings, the diviner has to summon up from memory an enigmatic, a cryptic verse, a formula, which he speaks out to whoever is consulting him, and the person consulting him then draws his own conclusions, his own deductions. And at the other extreme, this is an objective thing. The diviner has to be trained in knowing the verses, but you can call it luck or chance, or, of course, all sorts of theories. The ancestors, the gods, among Yoruba, the gods determine what the throw will come out like. See? And at the other extreme, you get divination by possession, where a priest or a priestess or a diviner gets possessed by an ancestor or a god, divinity, and then goes into trance perhaps, doesn't go into trance, but perhaps is possessed, and speaks with is the voice of the divinity, the ancestor, or whatever you will. So we have these two possibilities. An objective system and a system in which the diviner is possessed by some spirit or some divinity, and which we can perhaps call the shamanistic type. There's a shamanistic type of divining, and there's the technological, or you can call it by the Latin name, I suppose, of the sortilegious. Isn't there a Latin word, sortilege, type of divining? And the Talensi form of divination belongs to the sortilegious type. The basic idea is that it's all completely objective. It's being done for you. There's no such, if you ask, I've seen these possession diviners, and I've had my Talensi friends with me in southern Ghana. The Ashanti have possession diviners. And the Talensi, my friends always used to say, you know, it's completely bogus. Absolute nonsense is divination. They're just putting it on, deceiving these poor people. You see, they suddenly say, look, this chap has been prancing around all the time, talking in that funny voice and saying, you know, it's a God speaking to him. And he's just disappeared into the back of his room there, and he's coming out with a mug of tea. Well, what's happened in the meantime? Now, this was very common with these possessed priests. They'd suddenly vanish. One I saw did that, and have a cup of tea or some other refreshment, for after all, you can't keep on being possessed hour after hour for a whole day. From the Talensi point of view, possession is unthinkable. It's ridiculous. The dead are dead and gone, and that's not the way you can make any kind of contact with them. And they don't have any gods or divinities to make their life difficult. In the case of the Talensi, and the same is true of the Lowili, Lodagar, and all those peoples of the north there, the diviner is a key to the whole system of the people's religion. The essential basis of Talensi religion is their ancestor worship. And I'm going to show you, you'll see on the film, to begin with, the graves and shrines of the ancestors. And these graves and shrines are right beside the homesteads and right inside the homesteads. And this is not adventitious. They are there because, from the Talensi point of view, their ancestors are there all the time around them. They're dead, they've disappeared, but they're there. In fact, the last act in the funeral rituals, as in the funeral rituals of the Lodagar and Owili, is you've taken the dead out as a corpse, you've disposed of the dead as a corpse, you then bring the dead back into your home. This is the most important final act. Pehu Dugni. You bring the dead back into your home. And he's in your home now, enshrined in a shrine, an altar, something like that. So he's there with you. But though the dead are there all around you, the ancestors are all around you, your fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers and so on, they are not living people. And the big thing about living people is that if you have an argument with them, you can argue it out. You don't necessarily resort to fighting it out, but if you have an argument with someone, a dispute with someone, and you can't settle it between yourselves, you can go to an arbitrator. You can go to a judge. But you can't do that with the dead. If you have arguments with the dead, it's just too bad. You can't. How do you carry on an argument with the dead? They're always there, the ancestors, but they're not immediately on tap. They come on tap through divination and through the rituals of placation and reconciliation that are embodied in sacrifice. So the first thing about the divination process is that the function of the divination process is to mobilize the ancestors, get them into action, or to acknowledge that they have been active and you haven't really taken notice of it. You've known they've been active the way you know every kind of divinity. In fact, God himself has been active. If God, the Christian God, or the Jewish God didn't sometimes do things in our life we'd never believe that he was there, must show himself ideally in miracles. And the way Talensi ancestors show themselves to be actively there all the time is the same way newer ancestors show themselves to be active, or Zandi gods, newer divinities, or Zandi gods, and that is to say, by causing trouble. As long as things are going well, there's no problem. But every now and then, the routine of life is broken up. Somebody falls ill, somebody dies. Your crops get ruined. Fire burns your house. That is the signal that these spiritual powers are intervening in the routine of everyday life. And that is a signal for you to find out who's doing that. Which of all the multitude of ancestors every man has, which of them, or which group of them, is making a nuisance of itself, and why? And you can only do that through this ritual mechanism of divination. And it's when the diviner has divined that not only do you know who's doing it, doing what, but you also know what you must do in return. So you get both a diagnosis, a prescription, and an authorization. The choice is made for you to know what to do next. A diviner in Talensi is called a ba. It's the same word, you get it all over the whole of that area. And he has a bag. What he has. You'll see all this on the film. The first thing you'll see in the film are the ancestral graves and ancestral shrines. So I want you to take that off. And they are the ambience within which this is happening all the time. They're not in another world. There's no such thing as the world of the profane or the mundane or the practical in which human beings live, and another world. It's just one world that everyone lives in, one cosmos we're all in, but there's a dimension which is the dimension of the ancestors. The diviner is known as a Ba, and he has a bag called Kologo. This is usually a goat skin bag. Occasionally Sometimes it's a bag made of something different. And this goatskin bag is filled with his divining objects, which you see pictured here. It's very much like the Ndembu in that way. You know that excellent paper by Victor Turner on Ndembu divination. This object, this heap of stuff, looks like a heap of absolute rubbish. It's incredible what kind of stuff there is in it. See, one of the objects that was in great demand when I was out there were the discarded cartridges you put into soda stream machines. These bits of iron, you see, because iron or metal has a particular significance of importance. So the bag contains all these barakpan, as it's called, and as you'll see, the first thing that happens in the actual session is the diviner is confronted with a consultor, an individual who is there to consult him, to find out from him what he wants to be found out. I shall say later what exactly who are diviners. Let's just talk for a minute about the consulter. The consulter need not be himself the primary person, the victim, shall we say, or the sufferer, or the person who is directly concerned with the issue. Any expert, anyone who knows how to do it, can go and consult for somebody else. There is a skill in doing it. Not everyone has the skill. And although I was, so to speak, initiated into how to divine, I didn't go through all of it, because there's one part which is particularly unpleasant, and I refuse that. But, pardon?
Tell us more.
That's you'll see later. But I never really mastered the skills of either acting as a diviner or divining for myself. So I would ask somebody to divine for me. Anyone who is expert can divine for somebody else. And you'll see why. This is because the process of divination, the verdicts that come out, the judgments given, the opinions given, are couched in a language of abstraction and generality, which can only be given content and substance by the people who know about it. The diviner says, out of the divination session it comes, this is an affair concerning a woman. The man consulting says, what sort of a woman? Is it a mother? Is it a wife? Is it a sister? Is it a grandmother? Or what? And in the end, it works out, it's a grandmother. So this is an affair consisting of in which the party, the responsible party, is a grandmother. But the man who is doing the consulting, that's all he knows. And he turns to you and he says, look, you see what's come out of this? It's a grandmother. Well, you'll know which grandmother it was, and you'll know what your relations with her were, and so on and so forth. So you go away and you will know that it's your grandmother, and you insulted her. She's dead, of course, but somewhere or other. So it's the generality of the verdicts of the diviner's decisions or conclusions that stand out. It's the language in which it is couched is the language of generality. And to my rather almost horror, Jack, I found that when I was looking through my notes that I said, well, all this language is metaphorical and metonymic, and I nearly put my fingers through that. But see what it is. You'll see. So bear in mind that the consulter is simply a chap who's good at the game, not necessarily himself personally concerned in it. But when it comes to particular kinds of problems of making use of a diviner, for instance, at funerals, at death divination, causes of death, then the consulter is usually someone chosen from the clan that normally carries out services for the dead of the clan that has lost a victim. Joking partner or fraternally linked lineage. So what we have in a consultation, in a seance, is the expert diviner and the skilled consulter playing this game together. And between them, they're tossing words, gestures, and all sorts of things around, which have a complete general implication, or are of general significance, and to which neither of them, in theory, can give a specific content. And that is why there's no problem of secrecy about diviners or divination sessions. They're always public. Usually, for normal purposes, a diviner divines inside his own divining room in his homestead. And it's far too dark in these little rooms to take or it was far too dark to take an ordinary photograph. I have no pictures at all of what goes on inside the diviner's normal consulting room. All the photographic material I have comes from divinations to find out causes of death, because all death divinations have to be in the open. But if you go into a diviner's divination chamber, usually starts at dawn every morning, he starts divining, you always often find a queue waiting there, 2 or 3 people waiting to their turn. It doesn't really matter, they just sit and wait. And while he's divining away, people come in with messages, his children come in and talk to him, or his wife looks in and says, you know, I'm going to market, have you got any money? The diviner is not a clairvoyant, he's not possessed, he's not in any kind of peculiar state. He's a supreme technician, that's what it is. He regards it as a technical job that he's doing. A technical job which depends upon certain historical circumstances. You'll see that what happens is the diviner comes on with his bag, and the first thing is that the consulter clasps the bag and then calls on the consulter's ancestors. Says, ancestors, I'm here to divine. Please be present. I need your presence. And then the diviner takes over, and the diviner starts rattling his rattle and calling on his ancestors to be present. So what you've got there is you've set up a situation in which the two sets of, roughly speaking, the two sets of ancestors are talking to each other. And that's how the messages come through. There are other ways, by the way, in your part of the world, Jack, one of the commonest methods was these small wood sprites, weren't they? These outside spirits who talk through the stick. But we won't bother with that. It still remains a technical job. See. Then they begin divining. Diviners begin divining. So let's just see where we are. We've seen the ambience is the ancestor cult. There's no, with the Talensi, it's quite unthinkable for anything to be attributed to a witch or a sorcerer. There's no such thing at all. Witchcraft, there is a belief in witchcraft, but it has a very peculiar sort of role. But the idea that something that went wrong with one, whether I stub my toe or break my neck or anything like that, could ever be due to another human being acting as a witch unconsciously, inadvertently, or as a sorcerer deliberately, such as you get with the Azande or the Ndembu or many parts of Africa, is just not possible there. Somebody falls off a tree or something like that, and you're walking along and say, oh yes, have you heard about so-and-so? Put on so-and-so, he fell off a tree, broke his leg. And you ask him, as I've often done in these cases, always was way of doing so. I'd be walking along, I'd hear about somebody being ill, or somebody's crops having failed, or somebody's wife having run away, or something like that, or somebody having got hurt. So, poor old so-and-so, what do you think did that? Oh, it must have been some ancestor he's offended. And you say, but surely, don't you think it's possible that he could have been, that somebody could have been doing bad medicine to hurt him? Oh, no, 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 it wouldn't work that way. No, no, no. And the idea of witches is quite out. So we've got the ancestors always there. The ancestors, or it may be, and there are a few other things of the same sort, the earth, or particular kinds of groupings of ancestors. And we've got the diviner, an expert in his job, and the consulter, also perhaps an expert in his job, you can think of him, you see, operating together. And between them, there is this lot of stuff that's been poured out, this collection of physical objects, each of which stands for something, either by some form of perhaps metaphorical form, or through metonymical association, and a few other things. And the process begins. And the process usually begins, since it's got to be objective all the way. One of the big things about it is you don't believe what the diviner says or what your stick tells you. Your diviner is holding one end of a stick, of a rod, the divining rod, and the consulter is holding the other. And usually this end has an iron tip, the consulter's end, and the diviner's has different, might have various shapes, but often a kind of V up there. You've got to check every pronouncement as you go along. And it's checked in a very simple way. The normal thing is the diviner has in front of him two little stones, and the two ways of checking it is that the consulter says, if it's right, if what he's saying is right, hit this stone. And if the stick hits the stone, you know he's right. If it hits that stone, you say he's wrong. And he keeps on changing it, you see. You say it's a woman. If it really is a woman, let it hit the stone. If it's not a woman, let it hit that stone. And if it hits the other woman, you say, well, look here, you're telling me a lie. It isn't a woman, it's something else. But you'll try this. Usually they work in threes. You'll try it in 3 times, alternating this binary sorting out game, you see. The other way is also quite similar. It's one of various. The diviner picks up the 2 little stones and spits on them, puts the spit together, rubs them so there's a wet side and a dry side, and then throws them. Now you can see there what the possibilities are. You can have 2 wets, 2 dries, 1 wet, 1 dry. If it's the proper answer, the answer which finishes the whole business and says, yes, that's it, is 1 wet, 1 dry. If it's 2 dries, then it's a negative answer. It's a rejection. If it's 2 wet, they say, who's laughing at us? Somebody's laughing at us. Some ancestor's still sitting there saying, you haven't caught me yet, something like that. So you have these ways of testing, and you'll see that on the film. So, finally, let me just, before we start on the films, say, why does anyone ever seek the help of a diviner? Well, one reason you seek the help of a diviner is that you can take no action at all in relation to the ancestors unless it is authorized by a diviner. Everybody knows that on Christmas Day you've got to give presents to your folk around you. And you've probably got it all worked out whom you're going to give what to. But you can't do that until you've been to the diviner and he has okayed it. So before you sow before you reap, before you harvest, before the sowing, before the harvesting period, before you go on a journey, and so on and so on. You know, for instance, before you go into the fields to sow the crops, you know, everyone knows, every head of a house knows that he's got to go around to every single ancestral shrine in his house, which may be 20, 30, all kinds of things like that. And he's got to pour a libation of water, onto each shrine and say, Father so-and-so, Grandfather so-and-so, we're going to plant or sow today. He knows it. He's going to do that. But before he does that, he goes to a diviner, just quickly to check up, in case one or other of them wants something special. So it's a routine thing on one side. On the other side, you go to a diviner when there's trouble. Somebody's ill, or some loss has occurred. You must divine for a death, because no death is uncaused. No human death can be uncaused. People don't just die naturally. You'll see in this divination, it was actually the occasion of the funeral, the divination for the funeral of a man who died rich in years, rich in possessions, rich in children and grandchildren, and so on. And you'll see one of the things shown will be his son making a speech, sort of a valedictory speech about it all. He was, I should say, he was about 80 when he died. I knew him when he was a young man and then later on. But they had to go through this divination. The film shows only a small bit of the divination that took place that day. And it turned out, at the end, that he had died because of some complicated story, the upshot of which was that many, many years before, he had promised a particular sacrifice to his destiny shrine if things went well with him. And he had either forgotten or deliberately omitted to present this cow to his destiny shrine. Hence, at last, the destiny ancestors got annoyed and impatient and said, we'll have him up before us and let him tell us why this happened. And the interesting thing about all of that is, of course, the man is dead, so it's difficult to check whether he really did make this promise. But his sons are there, and the diviner passes this on to the sons, and the divine say, well, I was there at the time, and they said, the older son said, well, you know, he was a man who had many such commitments, and he wouldn't have told me of all his commitments, and I can well believe this is possible. Anyhow, we'll carry out this sacrifice, and then we can carry on with the rest of things. So with a death, it's absolutely obligatory to go to a diviner. But you go to a diviner when anything happens. You go to a diviner if you've had a bad night. You happen to say, well, I haven't slept well last night. Go and find out what it is. In a sense, it's because the ancestors are there warning you in that way that something's wrong. So you go to a diviner because there is an actual misfortune or an impending misfortune, trouble, or you go to a diviner when you have an undertaking in mind, whether it be to travel, whether it be to farm, whether it be to marry, to find out, in general, whether it's a propitious undertaking, and mostly whether there's any kind of precautionary sacrifices or precautionary offerings you can make to help you on with this game. Well, that's the kind of background, I think, that I want you to bear in mind. And now I think we'll have the film, Stephen, and the noise where we have it. Noise, we can now here is but right in public, with people coming and going all the time, with these groups of people acting dressed up as hunters, in the background there, women going in and out, talking and shouting, and here are the elders sitting. And this is because they make such an enormous fuss of things being done in public. With the Talensi, I've been at a court case where a man has accused another of wanting to run away with his wife. It's quite common, used to be. Even nowadays, they run away with other people's wives. It's quite a meritorious thing to do. And the chief has said, asked questions, and said, how do you know that he wants to run away with your wife? And he said, well, I was in the market the other day and I saw him talking to my wife and greeting her and giving her things. The chief said, come, you'll come off that. What man would be such an absolute idiot as to go and be courting another man's wife in public? Now, if you had told me you found them privately in your room or his room or their room, I would have believed you. But a thing like that done in public, no, can't be wrong. So they have this term, parlugni. Do you know it, Jack? Anything which is done, parlugni is open and above board. And you can talk about your enemy, parlugni, openly, and say anything you like about him, provided it's in the open. Oh, you want to play again? Good, yes, all right. But there's nothing about the divination, in any circumstances, that is secret or private. Look at Jeff sitting on the shrine. And 40 seconds. At the third stroke, it will be 12, 31, and 50 seconds. At the third stroke, it will be 12, 32, precisely. At the third stroke, it will be 12, 32, and 10 seconds. Panegyric on the father being pronounced. At the third stroke, it will be 12, 32, and 20 seconds. In a way, rushes to bush, or begins to behave in ways that suggest an attack of extreme hysteria, even behaves in ways that suggest that it might be a psychotic attack. And this is taken as an indication that some divinity in Ashanti, some god, is demanding the right to possess the character, what happens then is he's probably taken to a working diviner or a priest or a temple where he is accepted, where he has to undergo some probation to show that it really is true, that it is a spirit that's seeking to inhabit him, as it were, and not purely a sickness from our point of view. And he then undergoes a course of training. He's taught, in Nigeria, he'd be taught the various Ifa verses. Elsewhere, he might be taught roots and herbs and the whole, and gradually introduced into the whole priestly activities. And this may take 2 or 3 or 4 years. So he's selected by the way that shamans are selected everywhere, by falling ill or by running amok. But this doesn't happen with a Talensi. What happens with a Talensi is you go to a diviner because a series of accidents have happened, one after the other. Somebody's got ill, crops have failed, over a period of perhaps years. And the diviner divines perfectly, they're completely standard possibilities that come out. And one of the standard possibilities is that there is some matrilateral group of ancestors. There are always matrilateral groups of ancestors who are seeking to be accepted and acknowledged by you as a divining ancestress. This is what's causing the trouble. And generally, you fight back, and you try to postpone it. You do all sorts of preliminary rituals which you hope will postpone the evil day or even satisfy this ancestress. But over a period of years, it becomes impossible to deny her, and you have to set up a divining shrine. And then it's a very elaborate ritual. People come from her lineage to help establish the shrine and to initiate you. And so it usually happens that by the time a man becomes a diviner, he's a man in his probably late 30s or even later. And then having been initiated and having accepted this matrilateral spirit, and the matrilateral ancestors among the Talensi and many other peoples tend to be rather more vicious than the patrilateral agnatic ancestors, your own descent group ancestors. You see. And then having accepted him, after that you're equipped to divine, but you may not really be good at the game. As they always explain to me, partly it's a matter of what we would call intelligence. Some people are more intelligent than others. Some people who, since practically every family has a divining shrine, since you're in touch with your matrilateral ancestors that way, if your father was a diviner, or your grandfather was a diviner, or you had a father's brother who was a diviner, you might, as a child, have been in and out all the time. You may have listened to it. You may know all about it. You may have grown up with it. Then you may probably be quite good at it. But if, for some reason or another, you never had that background, you may not be good enough. You may not undertake it. Also, you may not want to. You may prefer to farm or to for instance, to play musical instruments. Moses' father got into great trouble because he refused to do that to divine, but he wanted to play his fiddle. He said he could make much more money that way, which is quite true. So you might want to do that. You might yourself not want to divine. So divination is partly a standard thing that everyone sooner or later gets into trouble with these matrilateral ancestors. You placate them gradually over the years by setting up a shrine, and then the choice is yours. Well, in the 30s, a diviner would start work at crack of dawn. People would come to him. And the usual fee was something like a penny. I was notorious, and people used to criticize me, especially when they got accepted me a bit. They say, you go to these diviners and you give them a sixpence. Now you know you're ruining the market. Very angry with that. Or you give them a handful of groundnuts or something like that. Or if you're a very rich man, for instance, if you're a chief, you send for a diviner to come to your house and to spend a day or even 2 days with you, divining right through the whole gamut of everything you want to divine him out, and you send him away with a basket of guinea corn or with a sheep. So you see the point about I'm making is your diviner is, as I say all the time, we've got to think of him as a skilled technician more than anything else, who's got the skills to get in touch with, to mobilize his ancestors who are there all the time, but can't be talked to directly. Can't argue with them. And you can't, of course, absolutely surely diagnose the cause of your own troubles. It's only when the diviner says, so-and-so. And by definition, everybody has got a whole burden of these debts to ancestors, to the earth, and so on. They're always there because he's got his own debts that he incurred by doing things that shouldn't have been done, sometimes completely inadvertently. He's also got the debts he's inherited from his father, and they may go back to his grandfather. And I mean, I've known cases where there's been a series of deaths in a family, and it's been attributed to, particularly to a great-great-grandfather who was a source of a very serious fight between clans. Now just very briefly, let me give you an example of the kind of transactions that take place between diviner that you saw, man with a rod, with a stick, going. The consultor is talking here. He says, I see a woman here, and I see a bird, poultry. This is so there's a question here, there's an issue. He's got this out of the heap, you see. He sees a woman. A woman's that's a woman, sticking very prominently there. End of a calabash of a good, some sort of good spoon. And of course, a hoof like that means an animal, a hoofed animal. This astragalus, one form or another, always stands for father. The knee bone, I don't know why, which is presumably some good reason. But if you look at all this collection of stuff here, you'll see a variety of different things, each of which stands for, now whether I call it a symbol or a sign or what, I don't really know what the modern, Stephen, you'll know what to call these things, whether there's a technical term for that. Huh? What is it? Are these signs, symbols, what are they? Words congealed or something? I don't know. So the stick you see is pointed to a woman, to a bit of the claws of a usually it's the claw of a chicken or a guinea fowl, which is a bird, to a bird, in my possession. Now, when he says my possession, it may mean his very own possession or the possession of the people he's representing. And I have cases, I have one case here, beautiful case, where a man was divining for his son's mother-in-law from a different clan because she was unable to do it herself and she was in trouble. The son-in-law couldn't do it, so he came to his father and said, will you divine for her? And he took the messages back. And then he went on from there, Nye Balamla. And Balam is the word, is the diviner's word for pregnancy or children, a child. And Yekpala, when he points a stick. Near Nukni. And that cryptic combination means to everyone here, here's a man, the question at issue, this disaster, this misfortune, has something to do, is caused by a woman. And this is connected with a bird. And it's a woman who is in my possession, and the problem is, I think the difficulty arose over a bird. Not only that, but it has to do with children. And the woman is a woman who comes from over there somewhere. Now we've got the picture complete. This is an ancestress of some sort who comes from over there. Not from over there, she might have come from over there. The fact that she comes from over there, I know particularly, or the people concerned will know, which clan she comes from. So they'll identify her straight away, which of these ancestresses. It has to do with something where a child was concerned, or children were concerned, and it has to do with an omission to make a sacrifice of a bird, either a chicken or a guinea fowl. We've got that particular cryptic exchange contains all of that to those who know, you see. And then he goes on about the child, or the children, the woman, the chicken. How did it happen? He goes into some of the history of it, you see. And then you see him suddenly saying, "Diviner, what's the matter? You're holding things up," because the diviner suddenly stopped and his stick was in the air. "Come on, get on with the job." And he goes on. Then finally he says, "Right, so what should I have done that I did not do about this woman, this chicken, this child, or these children?" Well, you get the answer. In terms of, it's all in my possession. Me sitting here, what shall I do? And then the divining stick shows the usual way of indicating sacrifice is the stick makes a circle like that. So, what I've got to do is I've got to make some sort of encirclement which will include the chicken, and will include the woman, and include the child. And of course everyone knows what it means. It means that for some reason or other I omitted to make this sacrifice, and now I'm better make this sacrifice, offer it to this ancestress who will be known to the people concerned, and because the ancestress caused the child to be ill or something like that, and this will make things good. That's the kind of thing that happens. And among the signs, although many of the signs are there, you point to the woman, you point to the man, you point to the man, for instance, that way. There are also a number of signs which come from the human body. For instance, one of the most common things is pointing to the belly. Now, if I would ask you, pointing to like this to the belly, what would you guess that to mean? What's that?
Illness.
Well, how illness?
Spear on the belly.
Not what?
Spear.
What?
Not pregnancy.
Could mean, yes, could mean pregnancy, could mean illness in the stomach, or it could mean something else very important in this, that you point here. Put here, food. You see. So the stick points, and then you're going to ask, you ask the stones, is it something to do with a child, pregnancy, or is it illness? And you'll ask this question the usual way 3 times. Or you might even check the diviner and say, "Look here, I don't believe you. Throw the stones." The diviner has to throw the stones the way I told you, see. So, and then there's another sign of the same kind. For instance, when it points here. What would you guess that to be? It's a bit more recondite than there.
Weapons?
No. It says it means collateral, on the side, a kinsman on the side, and then you work it out. You see, is it a brother, or a sister, or a distant kinsman? So you have signs like that, and then there are various things. the stick might point there. A mouth. Well, Jack, you know what a mouth is. It's a promise that you made, which you should have kept. But so it's a combination of the objects there, the diviner pointing to himself, the consulter pointing to himself, indicating where things come from. God is up there, you see no one, you point him down, he's very far away, you don't really have much to do with him. He's a very, God is being far away. Well, Jack, I think that's probably a good place to stop, and if anybody wants to ask any questions, by all means.